Sorry about that. Lots of technology layered on top of each other. Okay, so you guys saw it. At least that means you looked at the screen for 10 seconds, which is good. Yeah, one of them is instrumental music, okay? How many of you would have actually thought instrumental music could possibly be a problem for the Restoration movement in the 20th century? It is. How many of you have ever been to a service where they did not use instruments in worship? One? Only one? Okay. There are a lot of churches within the Restoration movement who do not use musical instruments of any kind. Not pianos, organs, drums, guitars, oboes, whatever you can think of. So we need to talk about that. Why was that an issue? And why do some people consider that a problem? But that became a big problem in the late 19th, early 20th century. And so today, there's a whole group of churches called Church of Christ, sometimes called non-instrumental or non-instrumentalist. Normally, their church signs just say Church of Christ, okay? You must have some there in Moberly area, I don't know. Okay, another one is, of course, liberalism, and that could take a lot of different forms. What do we mean when we say liberalism? Let me go back to Stephanie. Stephanie, because, I couldn't get an answer out of you before. What does it mean? What is liberalism? Aha! She took it back to the Bible. Very good. Yeah, so basically liberalism at its root is talking about the Bible not being authoritative, the Bible perhaps not being correct, okay, and certainly not being authoritative as to what we should or should not do. Yeah, that's good. It has a lot of forms, but that is a good basic form. Stephanie gets her imaginary gold star now. I've been wanting to get her one. Is this your first one, Stephanie? How many of you have? You don't know. Well, you have to keep track. When you get to 10, you get a platinum, imaginary platinum star. So I don't know. You probably certainly have 4 or 5, but I don't keep track. I leave that up to you. And then the third one is called open membership. Open membership. I wonder what open membership means. Sean, can you help us out? What does open membership mean? Well, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good general restatement of it. Yes, okay. We will give you the imaginary gold star for that. It's a little weak. But it still warrants an imaginary gold star. Good. Yes. Now, how many do you have, Sean? How many do you have? Gold stars. That was 9. That wasn't Sean giving that answer, though, so I don't know if I can trust that, because Sean's very trustworthy, but somebody just yelling out a number is suspicious. Okay, so open membership has to do with, let's say, for example, churches, I don't know about the church where you go, but churches, sort of evangelical kind of churches, certainly Christian churches, Restoration churches, for many, many years had, at the end of their service, what was called an invitation. You know what I'm talking about when I say that? An invitation. So, let's say the sermon is over, and they say, okay, now we're going to sing this song, and if you have a decision to make, if you'd like to join this church, if you would like to follow Christ, if you would like to be baptized or whatever, come forward during this song. You know what I'm talking about here? You know what I'm talking about? This is, Usually used to be called an invitation hymn or an invitation song. All right, so let's say you get to the end of the service. Let's say you are the head honcho minister of the head honcho Christian church somewhere, and you get to the end of the thing. You say, okay, now if you want to come forward, you want to join the church, come on forward. And somebody comes forward. You don't really know them. Maybe you've seen them at church once or twice. You don't really know them very well. And they say, yes, I want to join this congregation. I want to join the head honcho Christian church. What do you do at that point? Do you say, okay, welcome, everything's great, we'll sign you up, we'll put you in the books? Do you ask them any questions? Let me ask you that. Let me go to, somebody who would know. Someone who would know. How about Aaron Douglas? Aaron, what do you think should be done, and what do you think open membership would do? Yeah, this friend, the question is, do you really have friends there? That's my question. And if you do, are they helpful? Pick a helpful friend. Who is it? He's looking around. You're looking like you don't have a friend, or you don't have any helpful friends. All right, I'll tell you who. Audrey, what do you think this is? What would happen? What ought to happen? What does happen? What's the open membership? Come on, you can do it. Well, I think they actually have members. It's just, how do you become a member? Let's say, for example, we've been talking about the Restoration Movement here for now almost a semester. Let's say somebody comes forward. Are you going to ask them, what's your background? What church you belong to? Are you baptized? How were you baptized? Do you follow any creeds? Are you a Calvinist? So on and so forth. These are the kind of questions that I'm talking about. If somebody comes forward and let's say they say, yeah, I want to join your big shot Christian church, and yeah, I was a member of a church before. It was the hard shell Presbyterians over in Poughkeepsie, and now I've moved here into town and I want to become a member of your church. The question here is, of course, were these people ever baptized? If they were baptized, were they sprinkled? Were they immersed? Were they had it poured? Did this happen when they were a child? Did this happen when they were an adult? And other things like that. So in other words, if you want to transfer your membership from another congregation to the big shot Christian church, are you going to ask people any questions at all? Or are you just going to say, hey, we need more numbers, come on in, great to have you, that sort of thing. That's really what open membership is all about, okay? Open membership is, what does it take to join your local congregation? And of course, remember, since the Restoration Movement does not have any organization that's superimposed upon it, each congregation can do as they wish. So if a congregation says, hey, we're not going to ask any questions, who's going to say, oh, you can't do that? Nobody. Nobody's going to say that. So, all right, so the instrumental music becomes a dividing issue, okay? So, the question here is, so we're just going to look at each one of these now. Question here is, should instruments be used in worship? Now, I've been to some of your chapel services. I've watched some of the recordings of them. it seems to me like you're using instruments there. So you've already made a decision that if somebody doesn't agree with instruments, you don't care. You don't care. We're going to use them. You don't like it. Tough. Okay. Because, you guys have this person, I guess they're a drummer, but you have them locked up in a prison, like a plastic prison, up on the stage, over on the left. I say liberate the drummers. I don't know why the drummers are confined to drummer prison. Then you usually have somebody who is, plucking around at a bass. You got to watch bass players. They're especially troublesome. And then you usually have somebody on what I call a guitar, a git fiddle, and they're up there strumming away or whatever. And then you often have somebody on some kind of a keyboard, standing up there, pounding on a keyboard a little bit. I don't know. What else do you have? You might have, seems like you have a bass, a guitar, a drum, and a keyboard. What else do you have up there? Is that mostly it? Electric guitar? Acoustic guitar? What do you have? And a bass guitar? A violin. Okay. How about a saxophone? You ever have a saxophone? You ever have a tuba? A tuba, maybe an oboe, a clarinet. Well, diversify a little bit. Anyway, that's all right. Okay, so you mostly have guitars and a drum and a keyboard. Okay. All right. So should those instruments be used in worship? I guess one of the questions would be, is chapel worship? But maybe that's a question we don't want to ask today. Is chapel really worship or not? And if you're really having worship, can you use the instruments? Now, there are many people who say no. You should not use instruments in worship. By 1850, this has become an issue in some churches and growing. Since the Restoration movement, as you remember, is a frontier movement, right? You got the raccoon John Smith, is out in a cabin. You got Barton W. Stone, and you got all these people sort of living pretty primitive on the other side of the mountains in Kentucky and West Virginia and so forth. Guess what? They don't really have many instruments, because the main instrument that people were using in worship at that time were pianos, or really they were organs. They were like a pipe organ or some kind of instrument like that. Those are very difficult to transport across the mountains. I don't know if you've ever moved a piano. I've had to move many. Pianos are quite heavy, and they're very difficult to transport, especially if you got a wagon and horses and you're going across the mountains. My guess would be you're not going to transport a piano. Or if you start off, you might just leave it somewhere along the way. This is what happened a lot as people were moving westward. They would leave those big heavy instruments behind. So consequently, when they got to Kentucky and West Virginia and the eastern part of Ohio and so forth, they didn't really have these instruments. They didn't have a piano. You would go into a worship service, or you go into a meeting place, maybe like Cane Ridge, and they wouldn't have any instruments. So consequently, what would you do? You would sing. You would sing songs. You would sing hymns. And you would have, preaching and prayer and all that, but there wouldn't be any instruments. There certainly would not be some big drummer prison in those things, because they just didn't have drummer prisons back then. I'm not saying they shouldn't, they just didn't. But by the end of the 19th century, that is, as you're approaching the 20th century, it is a major controversy, and it's a pretty easy visual thing, tangible thing to be able to know whether someone's using an instrument or not. I can tell you, I used to preach at a church in Huntington, West Virginia. Okay, Huntington, West Virginia. Pretty good sized town. Home of Marshall University, all right? You may have heard of Marshall. Anyway, I preached at a place called Hylon Church of Christ for, 4 or 5 years. About 3-4 blocks away, there was another Church of Christ. That Church of Christ was non-instrumental, or as I like to call them, inorganic brethren. And they didn't have any instruments. And on occasion, when somebody would come to preach at the Hylon Church of Christ, they would get confused by the directions and they would end up at the wrong church. Okay? One guy was supposed to preach at Hylon, filling in for me, and he actually went to the wrong church. And he came in and people were already in there seated, so he thought, oh man, I'm late. So he walked all the way forward and he got up on the front and he sat down during the communion time or whatever. And then he looked over and he saw the minister looking at him very surprised. Who is this guy? And so the guy realized he must be in the wrong place, so he got up and he walked all the way out. Okay, so this can happen. One Sunday I was at the Hylon Church of Christ, and we didn't get a lot of visitors. We had a big auditorium, but we didn't have a big membership, didn't have a big crowd. And so this couple comes in, very friendly, never seen them before. I shake their hands, and they come in the door. They're very friendly. Oh, how are you? Nice to meet you. My name is whatever, Steve, and my name is Sally, or whatever. I said, well, welcome to Hylon Church of Christ. And they got past me, and they went up to the door where you walk into the auditorium. And as they turned and they looked, you know what they saw up in front? They saw an organ on one side and a piano on the other, and they acted as if they had seen like naked people in the church. I mean, they were just shocked. It was just like, what? And they looked at each other, and then they quickly walked out. They didn't say anything. I wanted to tell them, look, we're non-instrumental by default. Nobody here plays the piano or the organ. They're just sitting up there. But that was a very visual thing to them that said, this is not for us. And of course, my guess is they were wanting to go about 3 blocks over to the non-instrumental church where maybe they found it later on. So this becomes a big divisive point. And we see that it's a major controversy by the end of the 19th century. So in 1906, so here's a date for you. In 1906, there was a U.S. religious census that actually listed a separate group on their thing, because remember, there's no headquarters, there's no way to divide. But as they were counting up churches and counting up congregations in 1906, they listed a group that didn't use instruments separately from those that used instruments. So those that used instruments were called disciples of Christ. Those that didn't were called Church of Christ. And then, of course, we now know there are 3 groups. So the disciples of Christ, often called Christian Church, the non-instrumental ones called Church of Christ, almost exclusively. And then there's this strange group in the middle that's Christian Church or Church of Christ, and they use instruments, okay? So Central Christian College there is affiliated with that group in the middle, right? They use instruments. They're usually called Christian Church, sometimes called Church of Christ. the more in the South you are, the more likely that if you see Church of Christ, it's going to be non-instrumental. This is why these people were so confused, because in Huntington, West Virginia, you had two churches, both called Church of Christ, and they were 3 blocks away from each other. One used instruments and one did not. I have met people who said there is no Church of Christ that uses instruments. And I said, well, you haven't been in the ones I've been in, okay? Because there are. Now, how many of you have ever heard about this issue before, about the instruments? Okay? Yes, you've heard about it. And how many of you agree that you should not use instruments? One? There's one? Only one? Yeah? Morgan doesn't like the instruments. Wait a minute. I think I saw Morgan. Wasn't Morgan playing an instrument in chapel one day? So you're inconsistent in your Stephanie. Stephanie has her hand up. No? Okay. I thought you wanted to say something. All right. Stephanie's opposed. All right, so this becomes an issue. And remember, at first it's not an issue because people just don't have access to instruments. But as instruments become more and more available, this now becomes a bigger issue. Now I have a picture of a cow here. Yeah, nice, lovely bovine. And so when we see, it's a beautiful cow, I think. Yes, very nice. Well, this does become a bitter and divisive issue for people. Bitter and divisive. AC, you remember him, right? Alexander Campbell. What did Alexander Campbell think of the instruments? Let me ask someone. Stephanie looks like she has the answer, but she thinks I'm picking on her. So I'm going to go back to Audrey because she didn't really get the answer before. Audrey, for your imaginary gold star, do you think Alexander Campbell is for musical instruments in worship or not? Big Al. He was for musical instruments in worship service. I'm sorry, that is incorrect. He says, to all spiritually minded Christians, such aids, talking about musical instruments, would be as a cowbell in a concert. Now, by the way, I like cowbell. I say give me more cowbell. And I like cows. They taste great. So, Moses Lard, 1864, wrote, it would be better to live out of a church than to go into a den, such a den with an instrument. In other words, better off not going to church. Kind of like those two people that came to the Highland Church of Christ. They exited stage right very quickly and never returned. Didn't say anything. Never saw those people again. Okay? Because of the fact they saw instruments. Not even anybody playing the instruments. They just saw the instruments. That's all they needed to know. We were willing to have someone play an instrument. How dare we? Okay. So, people who say, hey, we should have instruments. Okay, this is the pro side. And that guy's supposed to be moving, but he doesn't. My stuff doesn't move anymore. They used to move, but that's all right. Oh, wait a minute. There he goes. Good. Okay. He's kind of like an Elvis kind of guy. They say it's expedient. What do we mean when we say the word expedient? Let me ask Bruce Heller. Bruce Heller, what does the word expedient mean? Yeah, it's going to help something. It's going to make something better, right? It's going to make it go faster, better, easier. so they're saying, hey, if you got instruments, that's a good thing. It's an expedient thing. It's going to help people with their singing, right? In fact, one of the early, he's often called the first liberal in the Restoration Movement, L. Pinkerton. He had them use an instrument in his church service in Midway, Kentucky, back in, I don't know what it was, 1856, 1854, something like that, mid-19th century. And he said, and here's how the story went. They would get these people together to sing, and guess what? They weren't good singers, and they couldn't carry the tune in a bushel basket. And so they would actually get together on Saturdays and go over all the songs for Sunday because they were so bad at the singing. And so finally somebody said, well, you know, I have this thing called a melodeon at my house. We could bring that over here and we could practice with the melodeon, and that might help us get the songs down, and then on Sunday we could sing them better. And so that's what they started to do. A melodeon kind of looks like a little piano, but it has foot pedals. You work the foot pedals and it generates the sound. And so anyway, eventually they said, well, why just use it on Saturday for practice? Let's just use it Sunday mornings. And so he began to promote that and began to really promote it, and became the center of a lot of this controversy. Well, those pros say it's expedient. They say, hey, nowhere in the Bible does it say not to use instruments. That is a prohibition. You know, like it says, you shouldn't you shouldn't murder somebody. That's in the Bible. That's a prohibition. But it doesn't say you shouldn't use instruments in worship. That doesn't say that anywhere. You can look through there. I don't think you're going to find it. And they say, oh, well, if you look in the Old Testament, certainly they were using instruments. David's hopping around, pounding on a drum. They had to lock him in a drum prison, by the way, because David was just hitting those drums too much. People would play musical instruments kind of in worship that way as well. But, you know, that's the Jews in the Old Testament. Certainly there's an example there. They say, oh, well, when you get to heaven, it talks about musical instruments. Trumpets, and, other kinds of sort of musical instruments there. Okay. Somebody just turned the lights down. Got very dark. I don't know what she did, but... Oh, Googly Drive. Well, if you take a look at a book called Revelation, you may have heard about it. Revelation 5, Revelation 14 is talking about scenes in heaven. And it's talking about different musical instruments that are there in heaven. So they say, hey, they used it in the Old Testament. They use it in heaven. Why can't it? Doesn't say don't do it. So they say it violates no command. Okay, so if you violate a command, no, it does not. Now, we are commanded, by the way, in the New Testament to sing. We are commanded to sing. So if you take a look at passages that talk about worship, we're commanded to have worship. We're commanded to pray. We're commanded to, speak the apostles' doctrine. There's things in the book of Acts we see that they did have communion. All these things are in there. But we are commanded to sing songs and spiritual psalms and things like that. And they're saying, well, you can still sing and have an instrument. The instrument doesn't stop you from singing. So these are all on the pro side. These are on the pro side. All right. And they say, well, it helps some people sing if they have the music, if they have the instruments. Now, by the way, I'll just point out that in a lot of services, the instrumental music is often so loud that, I just, it's sometimes you can't even hear anybody singing. And I've noticed a lot of people around me don't really sing much. You got people up on the stage singing, but the congregation, I don't hear a lot of singing. Maybe that's just in the services I'm in, but there is more emphasis on the people on the stage than the people in the audience, people who are there. In other words, worship is becoming, or has become in many cases, a performance. It's a performance of people on the stage rather than a participation of the people in the whole congregation. So you can do that with that what you think, but this is one of my observations that I think is, to me, worrisome, that we kind of leave the singing music part up to a small group of people, and everybody else just kind of doesn't get into it that much. All right. Now let's look on the con side. That is instruments in worship con. Now here I'm not talking about Khan from Star Trek, and most of you don't even know what I'm talking about there. You don't know what Star Trek is, and you certainly don't know the Wrath of Khan. But this is worship, instruments in worship con. Okay. They say it's an innovation. So they say, no, you shouldn't have it. Why? Because it's something people are adding that's not there. It wasn't done in the New Testament, they're saying. There's no evidence there's no example of any musical instrument being used in worship in the New Testament. So you don't see Peter saying, hey, let's lock John up in a drum box and let's go get our electric guitar going. You don't have any of that kind of stuff. You don't see the Apostle Paul saying, hey, be sure you have a saxophone player there help you out with this, or somebody on a violin. So they're saying there was no evidence of this in apostolic times. So you have to check this out for yourself. They say that we are commanded to sing, but it doesn't say to play or to play and sing. It says just to sing songs and spiritual songs, that sort of thing. So they're saying without an express command or an approved precedent, then we shouldn't be doing it. Okay? So this is the argument, sort of the crux of the argument. I would say as a matter of interpretation, that if you don't have something directly commanded, or you sort of have an example or something that's approved, then we shouldn't do it. It's a prohibition. Like the policeman there pointing at it saying, hey, no, you can't do that. So really, I think the musical instrument thing is, it's really an interpretation issue. How do you interpret the New Testament? I think it's more an interpretation issue than maybe anything else. And it's a very visual way to see that interpretation evidence come out there. The idea here is that if it's silent, if there's silence about something, then it's prohibited. Okay? Silence is prohibited. How much time do we have left? Oh, we don't have much time left. I will let me put these up. These are passages which those who are opposed to using instrumental music point to. Ephesians 5:19. Speak to one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Sing and make music in your heart to the Lord. Colossians 3:16. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another in all wisdom, and as you sing psalms, hymns, spiritual songs with gratitude in your heart. Okay, so these are important passages that they point to. All right, we have about a minute left. Are there any questions? All of the assignments are up, so please take a look at them. If you have any questions, let me know, and we will see you again, I guess, tomorrow. Okay, so take care.